Welcome to the Aviator Zone Podcast. Aviator Zone Podcast. With your host, Captain Felipe Santiago. Flying stories, career advice, and a lot of hangar talk. Let's talk aviation.
Welcome back to the Aviator Zone Podcast. Today we have Mike Stoklosa. He's a private pilot, instrument rating, and owner of a Cessna 182 RG that we actually went to go pick up together. We'll talk about that later on in the show. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Felipe. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Yeah, same to see you here. We run into each other all the time, but you're always running around flying that airplane. How many hours have you flown in your airplane already?
In that airplane, I have 560 hours. I have 659 hours right now.
In that airplane, 500 and what?
And 29 hours.
29 hours. And how long have you had this airplane for?
September 11th of this year will be 2 years. So just under 2 years.
2 years. You put about 250 hours a year on that airplane.
Yep. And we fly her a lot. She's a great bird.
That is amazing. The average airplane, I believe, flies about 100 hours a year for the private pilot owner or private ownership. So to fly 250 hours, you're doing 2.5 times that. That's really good. That's great for your airplane. Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself. What did you do for a living before you started into flying, and what got you into flying? So let's go back a little bit, and then we'll continue with the story about your 182.
I owned an automotive repair shop. I'm a certified master mechanic. Did that for 35 years. When I was in 5th grade, I got glasses and found out a few years later that you couldn't fly in the military if you had glasses. And that gave up everything for flying for me. I never gave it another thought, never even considered an airplane, just considered private, but didn't consider having my own airplane, and just put it out of my mind. One Thanksgiving, a close friend of mine calls me up and he said, I'm flying around today in what's called a Sea Ray, which is a flying boat, they call it, an amphibious aircraft, on the St. Johns River. And we're bouncing along and having a great time. You got to see this airplane. And I'm like, seriously? He goes, yeah, you're going to love this thing. Turns out they're in Apopka, Florida, is where they build them. We took a road trip up there, my wife, my son, and my friend. We met the guy who designed the plane, built the planes, and he took me for a test ride in it, or test flight, I guess you'd call it. And this guy's insane. I mean, he puts this little airplane through crazy maneuvers, and he lands the airplane by turning the airplane off and just coasting all the way to the water. So this is how safe this airplane is, he claims. So it was a very fun time. My wife climbed in the airplane and sent her for a ride in it. And she gets out of the plane, she says, there's no way you're buying this airplane. And I said, well, we'll talk about that. And that was, it made me say, I'm going to learn how to fly the plane. Well, I learned that you only need a sports pilot's license for that plane. And here you think a sports pilot, you only got to put in 20 hours.
Easy. Anybody can do it.
Anybody can do that. You know what? Flying an airplane is really easy. It's landing the airplane is really hard.
Unfortunately, you need everything, right?
Yeah. And she said, well, all right, the only way you're going to do any of this is you got to get a full private pilot's license. And so the search I went on with the search. I started making phone calls. Tamiami Airport. I was born on this airport. My parents owned 10 acres of land on 9 left. 9 left. So our house was right in the middle of 9 left. They got eminent domained out of there by the county to build the airport. So how was this? I land where my house used to be as a kid growing up on a regular basis.
So curious that you bring that eminent domain. I was just reading this book, Aviation Law and Practical Aviation Law and Aerospace Law. It's by ASA. Very good book. If you're a pilot, I think you should read it, whether you're a professional pilot or a private pilot. I think I shared you with some of my notes about that book with you.
Right, you did.
And it talks about eminent domain and, talking about some airports that people have had. How they take away some of your airspace sometimes from your property is like an upside down cake. So there's been cases where people have had open land and they've taken away eminent domain, they've taken up airspace by eminent domain, and they literally have like 2 inches of that they can build on the edge of their property, like 2 inches up.
Did not know
right?
that.
So you couldn't build because obviously you're in the protected
Right,
path.
right.
So they have these arguments back and forth with with the court of the city and all this legal stuff to try to be able to, hey, look, you took away my rights of use to that land, because what can I build that's 2 inches tall, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was pretty cool. So how long ago was this that they took away this land? Do you know?
I think it was 1963 or 64.
Right, because this airport used to be at FIU. And
Right.
then they moved it from FIU
The original
over here.
Tamiami Airport.
The original Tamiami Airport
Right.
on Tamiami, Trail.
Right, exactly. And so then, occasionally my dad would bring us out here to see the airplanes and drive around, but that was about it.
Was he sour that they took away the land?
Nah. He moved to closer into the city, so to speak. I mean, there was nothing out here. There was nothing out here.
That's how I feel like it's out west, and one day that's going to be, just like what we see here. I mean, you see it creeping and creeping and creeping. I think now they're talking about moving the, what is it called? The urban development boundary, I believe it is. So they're trying to move that west so they can develop more. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with this airport, because, again, we just build more stuff around here, and more houses means more people are going to be complaining about airplane noise, even though the airplane's been here for...
Right. Well, it's the old thing. You came to the nuisance. The nuisance was here, and you moved to it, so that carries a certain amount of weight with it.
Of course. Yeah.
But when you get enough people, then all of a sudden the weight disappears.
Yeah.
But,
it's sad, but it is what it is.
Right.
We've seen a lot of sad stuff happening on the West Coast with that. These little airports that the runways are being chopped up and, very restrictive with the noise abatement procedures. So going back, I took you off on a tangent here because eminent domain I think is so interesting, especially when it comes to airports. I think North Perry has been in some of that gray area for a long time. So back to you flew the Sea Ray. I remember you flew in a Sea Ray once here.
Well, that was after I started my class. The friend of ours who owns the Sea Ray, they take an annual trip to the Bahamas every year, a group of about 6 to 8 of those planes, and said, hey, do you want to go? And I said, sure. And it turns out that his friend has a Sea Ray, and he's was instructor. And so he rents the seat in the plane. So I got to fly left seat, and I got time for flying it and learned how to fly an amphibious aircraft over to the Bahamas. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. It was crazy.
So where did you fly in the Bahamas? Like, what island did you go to? Or you went to several islands.
Yeah, we went to South. We went to Andros first, and then we went over to, I believe it was Chub Cay, and I think we went down to Eleuthera, but it was down to Eleuthera we went. And then we came back. So
that's a lot of flying in a small airplane.
Yeah.
It's a lot of water out there, but it's beautiful flying. I remember when I used to fly the 135, we used to stay in South Andros. There's a place there called Small Hope Bay Lodge, and it's kind of like a little boutique hotel. Man, they had really good Canadian steak. But we used to love it because it was an all-inclusive place, and we would go in there and land. We only flew in the daytime. We didn't fly at night in the Bahamas. So you get there early. Sometimes I even went diving out there. So pretty cool place.
I love the Bahamas. It's such a beautiful flight over the water to see the different shades of color. I have a friend of mine that has a house down in Crooked Island, so I've flown down to Crooked Island three times, which is about 425 miles from Miami here. So it's you fly over the whole Bahamas chain. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, the shade of water. If you look at Google Earth and you zoom out on Google Earth, and you look at the Bahamas, you don't see that shade of blue anywhere on the world.
Right. It's
maybe
tremendous.
Belize has some of it. And I think there's some areas by India and stuff that have that kind of color of blue. But, I mean, the majority of it is here. And we're very lucky to have it so close to us. Absolutely. And so accessible in a general aviation airplane. So we're very lucky. So you went on this trip, and I think at that point you already were here at flight school. You came into my office once, and you said that you were done, that you were not going to continue doing this.
Right. I started in January, came and interviewed you and 2 other places on the airport here. And the other 2 were puppy mills, where they just cram you into a classroom 5 days a week and with a bunch of kids. And I was like, that ain't going to happen.
Well, we have kids here too.
Yeah, but I'm an old man. I was 59 years old at the time. And I said, I need a little bit more hand-holding, and I want it to be a little bit more personal. So I walked into here, and you have a beautiful facility here, and you introduced yourself, and you took me out to the airplane, and you reminded me of me when I was your age, just a go-getter and wanted to produce a great product. And I said, all right, I'm in. I started the next day. I handed you a check and said, I'm in. Let's do this. And I brought my wife with me because I wanted a second opinion of the whole thing. And Elena was very impressed by you also. And she said, now this will be a good school for you. You're going to like it there. And I did. So I started flying like crazy. I mean, I don't know if I was every day, but I was definitely 3 days a week for sure, just hitting it hard. And
you were frequent. I remember that. And I think that really helps any pilot, frequency. I talk about it all the time. I don't, I get bored saying it. But, if you do something once a week, you're never going to get it done.
Well, there is an edge there, though. It's a ragged edge that you run because I'm not 19 anymore. So in my brain, I thought it was 19, but my body didn't agree with that. And there is a tremendous amount of stress that goes on in learning how to fly an airplane, especially, you're not used to radios. You're not used to weather. You're not used to the control of the airplane. You're not used to the bumps.
Flying the plane's the easy part.
Every little thing that happens is new to you. So I didn't realize how much stress there was on me for doing that. And then I took my first cross country with, I believe, it was Juan. We took our first cross country. So we went to 3 locations, and I came back and I slept the whole next day. I couldn't get off the couch. I was like, what is this all about? And we were flying probably 2,500, maybe 3,000 feet. And I was just exhausted. And then it hit me that I said, if it's going to be like this every time I fly, I don't know that I can do this.
Or that you want to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, Elena was like, this is kicking your butt. And I was, well, I don't know. And I gave it a lot of thought. And at this point already, I had a contract on a Sea Ray to buy. We had a verbal discussion. It was a verbal contract, I would say, where, I talked to the guy, we agreed upon the price, and we were getting ready to send paperwork. And then this happened to me, and I had to call the guy up and say, I have to back out. I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to fly. And I was really a come to Jesus moment of what I was going to do. And I walked into your office and I said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's too hard for me to do. My physical body just can't handle it. And you were like, well, I don't know. And I said, dude, this is not safe. I'm going to fly my family around, and it's not safe.
Do you think, and this is coming back and kind of looking back at it, do you think that the stress of the requirements and knowing the minimums and all that stuff kind of puts more stress on the individual? Like if I were to say, for example, Mike, you're going to get your license, and it's going to take, we're going to go with an instructor and do this flight. And you had no other knowledge of, the minimum is 40 hours. Some people do it in 70. Do you think that would take an effect on the pilot?
Well, I was doing my own personal ground school at the same time of flying. So I had gotten the Sporties package, and we
had a different setup in the school. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we had a different setup back then. We used to do only online ground school and focus more on the flying.
Right.
And kind of let you do the online ground school yourself.
Right. So Sporties has a 900 question sample test, I guess you'd call it, or they try to give you like every possibility of a question that you could have. And I answered those questions every single day. Yep. I sat at a computer for whatever number of minutes each day and answered a group of questions, and then would start to keep track. You were able to keep track of the ones you got right and the ones you got wrong, and then I kept going back to it. So this was a daily routine, whether it was either in the air or I was studying on the ground. And at 59 years old, it was a lot different learning than it was when you were 15 years old. I was amazed at how hard and how much time it took for my brain to absorb the information and be able to get it right.
And that's scientific. I'm actually reading a book that kind of talks about learning and how people learn. And it's just the way that we are. Once we start aging, I believe it's past 30 is what they say. Once we pass 30 years old, it just becomes harder for us to learn any skill. And it's kind of crazy because, we see it with our students. And I think the Talent Code is called the book, and it talks about how people learn and how to make efficient learning. I think a lot of people, when you're a 16-year-old, you only have one thing, in your mind, right? To get my
two.
license. Well, we can't talk about the second one. So maybe that one's first, and then the flying is second.
Right.
And then after that, that's all your focus is, right? Flying. When you are later down the road, you're thinking of mortgages, wife, family.
I was very fortunate. I'm retired.
Right, you're retired.
So I had plenty of time to do this. I didn't have the other stresses. It is amazing, for me anyways, how much stress it was for me to learn how to fly an airplane. The other thing that I noticed is I've been driving a car since I'm 10 years old. So I had roughly 50 years of experience of doing everything with my hands and doing very little with my feet. So the first day I'm taxiing down the taxiway, Chris is telling me,
you're like a snake going on.
Stop using your hands. Your hands don't do anything. And so I finally got to the point where I crossed my arms in front of me and just learned how to just use my feet. So there was but the instinct right away all the time up in the air was to use your hands. And I was gripping the yoke way too hard. Now I fly an airplane and I rarely touch the yoke. I mean, I learned that you don't really fly an airplane. You kind of guide it in the direction that you want to go.
You tap it in the direction that you want to go.
The airplane flies itself, and it's a lot different. Elena was laughing at me the other day because we took a quick flight up to Pompano Beach to have lunch with a friend, and the weather was iffy that day. There were a lot of thunderstorms moving through here a week or so ago, but they were moving quick, and I like to fly up the west, over the Everglades, because I go to Boca all the time to fish. And so it's a quick flight for me up there. And I'm used to it. No flight following, nothing, get there. And I'm on the roll here out of Tamiami. And the controller here says, hey, you really want to go out west? Because there's a line of thunderstorms out there all the way out through the Everglades. And I say, yeah, I'm going to sneak right by it. He says, there's nothing up the coast. And I say, yeah, I know. It's all clear. I said, all right. And I'm on the roll, and we're having this discussion on the roll as I'm lifting up. So I said, all right, give me a squawk. He gives me a squawk, switches me over to Miami, and Miami turns me to the north immediately. And I say to her, I want to go east.
She took you over Miami International.
She turned me right back out to the Everglades, flew me right back into the weather. And I'm going, she switches me to the next controller, and I say to the next controller, this is ridiculous. This is not what I asked for. And then he chides me, which he's right. What did you accept it for? Tell her, no, you're going to fly east. And so the point of that whole thing was then he switched me over to Opelika because I had to go through Opelika airspace. And then Opelika switched me back to him. And then him switched me to Fort Lauderdale. And it's just boom, boom, boom.
So the workload is just
all this is happening in a minute. This is an 18-minute flight. And all this is happening right away. And Elena, I was laughing at Elena saying, how far have I come? Where I don't even bat an eye at switching all this stuff around and the airplane, flying the airplane and doing all of that, where when I gave it up, it was just consuming. I laugh about this regularly with her, that how far have I come to do this? It's just, when I got my instrument rating, the next day, I took off and flew in IMC. The next day. I don't wait for anything. We flew Matthew, my son, back up to Tallahassee, and we flew through about 30 minutes of IMC at about 6,500, and then we had to get down into Tallahassee. Now, we broke out at about 2,000, but still, I'm fresh. I just got my license, and we're doing it, and it was stressful, and it was not easy.
It's a little bit easier once you have that experience, right? Because when you got your ticket, you had about, what did you have when you had your ticket? About
well, I got my PPL at 76.
76. But when you got your instrument rating, how much time already had you flown on the airplane?
I took a year off. Well, not a year, 6 months off just to fly my airplane, just to learn my airplane.
And that saves a lot of time, because once you're familiar with the airplane, now you're not thinking about, how do I land this thing? How do I slow this thing down? How do I turn? When should I turn?
Right.
When do I put the gear down? That knowing that process and having that rhythm and then throwing in instruments on top of that when you have 76 hours is a lot.
Right. So I got my PPL in August of 2020, August 7th, and September 11th I picked up my airplane. So a month later, I bought an airplane in Baton Rouge. You went with me. We picked the airplane up and we flew it home.
So I remember that flight. We got to Baton Rouge and we were going down the runway. And what's the call that we always make going down the runway?
Yeah, airspeed's alive.
Except the airspeed was not alive.
So it was a challenge. So the flight plan was to fly from Baton Rouge to Tallahassee to see my son because I wanted him to see the airplane on the way home. And then we would fly down the coast to Miami. Well, lo and behold, Hurricane Sandy was coming up the west coast of Florida and out in the Gulf of Mexico. And by the time we got to Tallahassee, it was just bad weather. We couldn't go to Tallahassee.
We went to I've done a couple of repos with hurricanes in the Gulf.
and you pick up the iPad and say, we're landing here at this little tiny airport called Quincy in the middle of nowhere. And I had always struggled with finding the airfield. I could never see it. My instructor, Juan and Chris, would always say, do you see the runway? No, I don't see the runway. Do you see the? No, I don't see the runway. And you say we're landing there, and I go, Felipe, it's right there. I was like, and you go, where? And that's the first time ever I've seen the runway.
This was a grass strip, no?
No.
This is later.
They have both the grass and the pavement.
Okay.
But we landed right now, and as soon as we landed, I took pictures of it. 6 minutes later, the skies opened up, and you wouldn't have been able to get in. And so it was just amazing.
Yeah,
so,
it was kind of one of those things like, this is where we got to go, and this is as far as we're going to go.
No talking about it. We're just doing it now, and we're done. We ended up spending the night, which is what you do with bad weather. You make these great decisions to keep yourself safe. We spent the night. We got up the next morning. We flew home with the hurricane going off the west coast there, but it was far enough offshore where we actually had a really nice flight home.
We had a great, I mean, even honestly, it didn't feel like there was a storm in the Gulf. It felt like a regular afternoon in Florida, right? We went through and then, starting to get bad in the afternoon, land, spend the night. The next day we flew back. And then I remember that, I mean, it was clear skies until the time that we got there. And then the next day we flew back down. You fell in love with that airport when we went there.
I did. We went back several times. Yes. Yes.
Your son met us there, and then he drove us to a hotel. We spent the night there.
Right.
And then we took off the next day. I can't remember. So he stayed up there, and then we came down to Miami one straight shot. Right. It was a 2-day repo for that airplane.
Right.
We were planning on doing it all one day, but we got stopped. Yeah, it was a while back, so I kind of had to refresh my memory.
If it wasn't for the weather, we would have done it in one day. Now, the thing that I recently, well, I shouldn't say recently, but about a year ago, one of the things I liked about the airplane, I was looking for an airplane that could carry a good useful load and had good speed. So because this is a retractable, Cessna didn't make the retractables for very long. They made it from 78 to 86 for this 182. And she has turbo, and so she has a ceiling of 18,000 feet, and she has onboard oxygen. So all those things were what I wanted to have in an airplane, but never got around to using the oxygen. I had to get everything set up in the plane and all that, and we're never flying high enough. And then one day I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. I want to see what oxygen is like. And then Elena and I discovered part of my being tired was lack of oxygen. So even flying, we put oxygen on at 6,000 feet now. And we are addicted to it. Just love oxygen.
So you don't have an Apple Watch, but I've actually noticed, and I've done my blood saturation at altitude and cruise when I fly for work, and I'll be down in like 94, 95. And the other day, actually, I turned my mask on, boom, 100.
It is just amazing. I actually have a secondary bottle that I keep on the plane too, just because I don't ever want to be out of it. We fly regularly now at 12 to 15,000 feet. It's much faster up there. It's much cooler. It is just tremendous. I mean, I will not fly without oxygen. It is just so enjoyable. And now both of us land, and we're not tired. Elena used to be exhausted too. She's not even flying the plane. So we brought Matthew home about 3 months ago, and we were flying high, and he was it had oxygen on, but it's amazing people don't breathe. He was getting very low on his, he was getting hypoxic with oxygen on because you got to remember to breathe through your nose and to actually breathe the oxygen in. So even though you have it on, you can still have an issue. I bought a setup that you wear on your forehead now, and it goes to the iPad and monitors it the whole time that I'm on the plane.
That's so cool. Talking about that, when we first picked up your airplane, it had older radios, no basic instrumentation on it.
Right.
So I remember when you brought it back in, we kind of talked about it, and then you did some upgrades to it. Tell me about the upgrades you did on your airplane.
We initially put in 2 new Garmin radios and a G5. What a tremendous instrument the G5 is. That is just fantastic. So I have a blend of old gauge steam gauges and new technology, and it also has the Garmin 375.
What do you think about the 375? Because everybody talks about it. We put it on all our airplanes.
I don't know. I flew it on your airplane first and was fortunate that the plane came with it, and I love that device. It just does everything I wanted to do without thinking twice about it. Garmin gives you a trainer that you can have on your iPad, so you can. I spent a lot of time at home learning how to use it, and then try it. I'd learn it on the iPad, then take it to the plane and do it on the plane.
Apply it on the airplane.
So what I wanted to do, as I said earlier, was get used to flying my airplane and become second nature. Now, it came with the Cessna Autopilot back from 1979 that worked great, but all it does is it wings level. That's it. And which was fine. You trim out the airplane and it holds the trim, holds the altitude, and it worked fine. It wasn't so great for doing approaches. And I also wanted to learn the approaches only by hand. I didn't want to ever have to be in a situation that a piece of technology fails and now I'm rusty and I can't land this airplane when I need to land the airplane. So I purposefully did not upgrade anything else on the airplane until I got my instrument rating. And so I did everything by hand flying it. And for me, it was the right way to go.
So did you put an autopilot in it now?
I just got it.
What'd you get?
I ordered it in, believe it or not, September of last year, and it just got put in a month ago. Everything was so far behind in getting it, and I put in the Garmin GFC or GCF 500.
GFC 500.
Right. What a device. Oh my God!
Just like the wing leveler of the Cessna Navomatic. What is it? Navomatic.
Yes, Navomatic 300. This thing will fly it down to the runway.
It will crash on the numbers.
It will crash on the numbers. So part of the deal for getting that was Elena has a big concern about what she would do if something were to happen to me. So it has the blue button that you press.
Wings level.
The wings level, no matter what's going on. You turn that thing on its steep turn and press wings level, and it just levels out. So now it buys you a lot of time to be able to do something. Then all you do is punch in the approach and tell it to fly. And it flies right to the glide path, hits the glide path, makes the turn, hits the glide slope, starts taking you down to the runway. All you got to do is set the power, and you're done.
Are you going to get auto thrust on it too?
It is just what a change it has made in the way that airplane flies. So I get my instrument rating. I told you, and I right away go do that. Then in December, so I got it in August. In December, we decide to fly to Dallas. So the whole flight, well, I should say from mid-state Florida, the plan was to land in Tallahassee, see my son, have lunch with him, and then go over to Baton Rouge. And that was going to be our first flight. We get to...
It went just as planned, right?
Oh, just as planned. Always just as planned. So 100 miles out from there, it is IMC the whole way. I get there, and this is going to be my first official full IMC landing in an airplane. It is nothing like what you trained for. Nothing at all, which I'm sure you know, but mine is fresh. Yours was 100 years ago. And the controllers bring you into the final approach fix. They don't line you up way out there. They expect you to come right in at 1,700 feet and be ready to put it down on the numbers. That wasn't happening. I was amazed at how terrible I was. I kept flying back and forth through the glide path, and I finally said to them, I'm out. I'm not doing this. get me out of here. And they were very cool. They had no problem. Gave me a heading, gave me an altitude to go to, and got me out of there. Looked down at my iPad, saw that Destin, Florida was still visual. Headed over to Destin. Get to Destin. It's IMC. So now I have to make my second approach. I've already failed at my first, and now I got to make my second. And so there's Eglin Air Force Base is right there just before Destin. So you're with an Air Force controller. I missed the first approach. I have to go missed, and I come around and I get on the radio and I say to him, "Listen, my friend, I'm tired. This is a newly minted IMC pilot or instrument pilot. I need to get this on the ground and I need help." And he said, "No problem. Hang on a second." He comes back to me in about a minute and he says, "All right, it's just you and me. Nobody else is on the frequency. It's just us. We've cleared the airspace. There's nobody here but you and me. And I'm going to talk you all the way down to the ground." I swear to God, it was like Juan was sitting next to me. It was such an amazing feeling to have this guy talk me down to the runway.
And it's such an important thing too, right? Because you had a plan, you went to this, and then you diverted to an alternate, and that alternate became bad too, right?
Right.
So now it's like that stress of, man, I made the right call over there, and now I'm coming over here, and this is bad too, right? So that third call was speaking up and saying, "Hey, I need help."
And let me tell you what, you tell them you need help, they give you help. I don't know what anybody else has experienced, but my experience has been every time with ATC, if I ask for help, they give me help.
I don't think I've ever heard a case where an air traffic controller has not helped a pilot in the point where they say, "Hey, I need help."
Well, and this wasn't even terrible. I mean, we broke out at like 600, so it wasn't it wasn't down to minimums, but still it was nerve-wracking. I get on the ground, I go into the FBO, and I'm sitting there in the pilot's lounge with a pilot over there, and we're chatting. Turns out he's an alumni from my high school here in Destin, Florida, and we start chatting. He flies for Publix. He flies their private jet around. And he said, "Dude, you got really lucky at this place because you got an Air Force controller." He said they deal with this stuff every day, all day long. New pilots, training.
A lot of training.
A lot of training. He said these guys are really patient. They like doing this, and it was exactly what I experienced. This guy was very calm all the way. Never switched me to tower. Kept me all the way to the ground. He said, "Once your wheel's down, then you can switch to tower." So the guy was it was amazing. It was just amazing. Took an hour and a half rest, jumped back in the airplane, flew to Baton Rouge. IMC the whole way.
You're crazy.
We're 9,000 feet. So I'm coming down from 9,000 feet IMC into Baton Rouge. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's as dark as if it were midnight. All the lights are on the runway. Now, fortunately, there we broke it at 1500, so for there, it was no muss, no fuss. I thought Elena was going to kill me. I mean, but what a trooper she is. I mean, she has probably 400 hours in our airplane sitting in the right seat.
She's crazy to follow you around for all those adventures.
I'm telling you, it's crazy.
It's funny, you talk about being nervous, and you kind of point at me and say, "Oh yeah, for you." But I tell you, the first time I ever did a 0-0 landing where we couldn't see anything outside and the airplane doesn't auto land. Talk about being nervous. You're biting your nails and looking at those instruments, and you see the littlest flick on the localizer or the glide slope, we know we're going to go around. And coming out, and then just, boom, there's a runway, airplane touches down instantly, and you just stop it on the runway. It's like, whoa.
So to follow the story up, we go to Dallas. We spend a few days in Dallas, have a great time. We leave Dallas. We have a tremendous tailwind. We're up at 15.5, having a great time flying back. And now we're going to Tallahassee again on the way back to see our son. And it's IMC getting down to Tallahassee. Fortunately, this time, it was straight in. I didn't have to do anything except straight into the runway from 15,000 feet all the way down to the runway. So I said to Elena, "Listen, here's what's going to happen. You watch for the ground, and I'm going to just fly my instruments." so that at least we have a known time when we break out. Now, they told us it was going to be about 700-ish breakout was what the pilot before us had said. So we kind of had an idea of what to expect.
The CRM, right? CRM, Crew Resource Management. She's not a pilot, but you reduce that workload just by saying, okay, I want you to look outside. When you see the runway, let me know. I'm going to focus inside on flying the airplane.
Right, so that I don't have to move my eyes from the panel, just stay right to there, and she'll say, oh, I can see the ground. And then boom, and she knows what the runway looks like. She knows what the VASIs look like, and so she knows what to expect. So it worked out perfect. Let me tell you what, the elation the two of us had of landing this airplane for the first time in true IMC, and the just knowing that you can do it. It was just tremendous, just tremendous.
It's crazy flying around instruments and a little airplane. For me, it's kind of scary. I'm very picky when I do it. Not that it's scary, but I don't have that need to go kind of thing. At work, I'm gonna go right, unless it's really bad and I know that it's gonna be unsafe. But when it comes to the little light airplanes, I'm kind of like.
But we never plan to go because even though we know it's that way. Tallahassee, I've probably flown into Tallahassee 15 times now. It is always bad. I think we've flown in there twice where it's been beautiful weather flying once you get to Tallahassee. It's beautiful around it, but when you get to Tallahassee, it just sucks. So it's great having that ability to know that you can break out a 700, and 700 is still well above the ground.
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about.
I feel safe doing an approach of 700. It's when you start getting to those approaches at 200 feet, 250, right at minimums.
I don't know that I would be doing that unless I have an emergency that I have to get down, and the alternative is just as bad or something. Now, we fly with full fuel all the time. We never play the game of fuel. That plane is filled to the brim every single time. I think the longest I have flown is 5 hours in one stretch.
The longest distance you take in the plane has been where? Texas?
To Dallas. Yeah.
Dallas, wow.
Yeah.
And how long did that take, the entire flight?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we broke it up in 2 days, so it's probably 10 or 11 hours full trip. But I like to not fly more than 5 hours. I mean, I've round tripped Tallahassee quite a bit, where I'll wake up in the morning, fly to Tallahassee, pick Matthew up, bring him back, and so land him back here. So
a little bit about Matthew. Matthew, when is he gonna get his license?
Yeah, as soon as he gets done with what he's doing up in Tallahassee.
I know he's
because the thing about flying is you got to fly. If you get your license and do nothing, it becomes a problem. My nephew started taking flying lessons at the same time I did. He got his license a month later after I got mine and hasn't flown since.
Yeah.
One of the guys that I trained with here in your school, he got his license and then hasn't flown much since. It's a great thing to have, but that touch and feel of everything that goes on, and it's different every time I fly, which is the beauty of flying. It's never the same trip. As many trips as I've taken to Tallahassee, it's never the same trip. We may fly over the same thing on the ground a lot and see it, but the weather is always different. The conditions are always different. It's just you never are going to see the same. It's going to be a different runway, a different approach, it's just always different.
Different controller takes you in a different way.
And I have gained so much experience, and there's nothing that replaces experience. That experience that I have being able to fly, as I said, that trip to Pompano. If that had happened just after I got my license, it would have been disastrous for a lot of people involved in it. It just
too much workload very quickly.
I mean, I saw the airspace was coming up for Opelika. I didn't hear the last digit of the frequency, so I got the frequency wrong, and I call and there's no answer. I see it coming up on the screen. I start at 360. I just turn away from it because I know I have to, and didn't even worry about it. It wasn't a concern to me that I was going to have to buy some time for myself. Call back to the other controller, get the right frequency, got the right frequency now, and now it's no problem.
That is, for whoever hasn't flown that shoreline, it's not an easy.
No.
It's easy, right? You're 500 feet flying northbound over the shoreline, but the workload of switching controllers, because you go, if you're coming up, I guess you don't really talk to Apalaca if you're on the east side of the shoreline.
You don't talk to
only
Apalaca,
if you're going up the intercoastal. But if you're going up the shoreline northbound, you talk to Fort Lauderdale International, right? Then as soon as that, they switch you over to Pompano, I think it is.
Depending where you're going. If you're staying offshore, then it's not an issue. Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach are the two that stick out into the water.
Into the water, too. But I think Pompano does, too. I think if you're flying right on the shoreline, I used to tow banners on that route back and forth. And even on the banner, we do that all the time, right? So it was like checking in and switch frequency, switch to the other one, because we would also come down on the intercoastal. So now on the intercoastal, you talk to Pompano, Exec, and all those. All of them are just one little place. So if you're not experienced, you don't know the frequencies, or you're not prepared, it can really come in and you'll bust an airspace in a heartbeat.
Well, I'll tell you, I used to think that we had busy airspace here. I have found that for me, the two busiest airspace are the Tampa area and the Jacksonville area. Oh my goodness, there are so many military bases in Jacksonville. You can't take off without running into a military airspace up there. It's
Destin
crazy.
is pretty busy too. There's a lot of restricted airspace there because of all the military training and the airspace. You got that flight line, the route that they want you to take over the shoreline. But yeah, Tampa too. I've actually flown into Tampa. There's so many airports, and they all start with St. Petersburg, Tampa. So you tell the controller, he goes like, yeah, which one? The Tampa airport, the executive one. It's like, yeah, which one? There's this one.
well, my parents live in Largo, which is Clearwater, so I fly into a small strip over there called Clearwater Air Park, single strip, non-towered, and I usually fly following up there because they get me in so easily through all the airspace there. I mean, I've done it without it, but it's just so easy on the way up. On the way out, I don't use flight following because I just stay 1,200 and I'm past the Tampa Bay, and then it's nothing. It's clean.
Get out of there.
Yeah, no problem. But getting in there is a little challenging, even to the point where I get yelled at once flying into there. I'm under flight following. They turn you out to the coast, and then they turn you into the airport there, and you're flying behind St. Petersburg. And the airspaces are really close to it, and if you're doing the 3-6 runway there, you're barely have enough room to turn to base without bumping into airspace there. So I'm under flight following till 2 miles from the airport, and then he releases me. I barely have time to switch over to find out what's going on the CTAF there locally, and he switches me over, and we go to turn. I see a C-130 Coast Guard flying up and to the left of me, and I'm going, what the heck is going on? I get on the ground, and a woman at the FBO comes out and hands me a phone number. And I said, all right. So I call the phone number, and it's St. Petersburg. And he said, hey, did you just land over there at Clearwater? I said, yeah. He said, you went through our airspace. I said, I'm sorry. And I'm surprised because I was under flight following the whole way. And he didn't release me to the last minute. He said, we had to divert that C-130 for you. And he was surprised that I was under flight following. He said to me, they do that to us frequently, where they hand you off too late to really do anything.
Yeah, sometimes you got to be careful with that because they, not be careful, but you'll be in a situation where you think that you did something wrong, and it was just that the controllers didn't communicate with each other, and in reality, you were in the clear, right? So.
Well, I mean, technically, I was in their airspace, even though I was being directed.
Right, but if it's a class Delta, unless it's a Bravo, you're good to go. You have you can be in there. If the guy's sending you come in through there, you're on a squad code, you're flight following, you're good to go.
So it was one of those first time getting make this phone call.
And that's scary.
You kind of wonder what it's all about. And my recommendation is always be polite. Always be polite and apologize. And see what they,
figure it out, right?
Right.
We're humans. We're always going to make mistakes.
The guy was very kind. He said, listen, anytime you need our airspace, just here's our frequency. Call us. We'll happily let you fly through it. And not an issue. He said, I was just wondering what was going on. So it was a learning experience. I get having a learning experience every single time I fly. There has not been a single time that I've flown where there wasn't something that I said, all right, I can do that better, or I'll do it differently next time. It just, even flying around here locally, I'm at this airport that we call our home airport. I mean, there's nothing better than a long trip and you're flying back to your home airport. You have that dialed in. You know, you've done that 9 right so many times that the airplane just knows how to land.
It'll land there by itself. I used to joke around because we used to go to the Bahamas to Marsh Harbor and Treasure. I'm like, if I take off and release the yoke and say Treasure, the airplane goes, choop, flies right to Treasure. Because you do that flight so many times. But I agree. There's nothing like hearing that, you know, Tamiami Tower, you're clear to land, your runway, your home. There's just something about that, especially when I do these long cross-country flights.
Right.
Of bringing the airplanes in. I love doing that check-in. I always steal that check-in. I want to be the radios. Another airplane home. Mike, talk to me a little bit about aircraft ownership. So you've had an airplane already for 2 years. You bought obviously a used airplane. It had already. We did talk about the avionics that you did, but talk to me a little bit more about like the daily and the maintenance cost, operating cost. Kind of, what do you see? Like, what's your advice or somebody that's looking to buy an airplane?
I am absolutely the wrong guy to ask that to because
you're very hands-on.
I don't pay attention to the cost. This was one of these things that I decided I want to do it. I like it, and it is what it is. You know,
as far as like headaches wise, like, you know, I think when people think of a used car, especially for somebody that's not in aviation, I'm sorry, for used airplane, somebody that's not in aviation, then think of used car thing, right? Like you go to a dealership, you buy a used car, who knows what the previous owner did.
You know, it was interesting. This plane had a belly landing back in 2010. A long, long time ago. And nobody wanted to touch this airplane. I had passed this airplane over 3 or 4 times before I even made a phone call at buying it. And then I just called them up and made a deal, and it was done. And that plane has been so rock solid. I mean, it just oil changes and tires and, you know, the annual inspection. Now, it's important that you really have a good relationship with the mechanic. You've got to have that relationship, that you are loyal to them and that you support them, and they, you pay attention to what they have to say. I mean, I can call my mechanic at any time, and he answers the phone, which is what you really need. I've been in other places and had an issue where I couldn't start the plane in Georgia one day. And he was there at the end of the phone and was able to give me some advice, and we ended up calling the mechanic on the local airport to figure it out. It wasn't a big deal, but you know, it's when you're out there in the middle of nowhere.
It's tough, right?
Right.
Especially when you land there and it's a Sunday afternoon and there's nobody around the airport and you got stuck because of something. You know, I've had my stuck on a Sunday afternoon in an airport with a broken airplane, and it can.
And the big, believe it or not, the biggest thing was the plane sat for 2 days in 20-degree weather. So my bird isn't used to being cold, and I'm not used to starting her cold. Yeah.
Funny story about that. So I went and picked up a 172 in, I think it was Moline, Illinois. Is that Illinois? Anyways, somewhere up there, right? Brand new kid. I had a little bit more time because I've been flying so young, but a brand new private pilot license. And my mission was to fly this 172 back to North Perry. Cessna 172P model. I walk into the hangar, they're showing me the airplane and all stuff. I'm doing the walk around on the airplane. Pick my head inside the cowling, and I'm like, is that an extension cord? Did somebody leave an extension cord inside the airplane? Oh my God, look, they left an extension cord. And I pull this cable, and the guy's like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, look, the mechanic left an extension. He's like, no, that's the heater for the engine.
That's the block heater.
Right, but here in South Florida, right, you don't even think about that stuff.
Exactly. I mean, the one day a year that it gets into the high 30s.
And then none of my airplanes at the flight school start, and everybody starts, why isn't the airplane turning on? It's like, because it's cold. The airplane, my airplane is carbureted, so it has a primer and has 4 ports for the primer on the 6-cylinder. Well, 3 of them were clogged, and I didn't know that because here in Miami, you push the primer, turn the key, and it starts. Right.
So up there, what was happening is we were actually not getting enough fuel into the cylinders to be able to start the plane. And we thought we were flooding it, but there wasn't any fuel, and we pulled spark plugs out, and there wasn't any fuel in spark plugs. So it was like, interesting. So we went, once I got it home here, we took the primer injectors out, cleaned them out. Now you just look at the key and the thing starts. It's
got gas.
What a difference, the plane seems like it's doing everything right, but it wasn't. The little tiny nuance of starting an airplane in the same temperature all the time and then starting it somewhere else, and you discover this.
But that's another lesson for the logbook, right?
Absolutely. That's what I said. Every time I fly, there's and my checklist has gotten longer and longer, meaning my 50-hour checklist. So every time something comes up, it gets added to the checklist of could it be a possibility.
One thing do you have insurance on the airplane?
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
have insurance. And how was the experience of insurance on being older and having a retractable landing gear airplane? That's a fear that a lot of people have, or they walk away from retractable airplanes because of that same reason.
I don't know if mine is, my first year was like $3,300. I mean, I don't know how expensive that is. I thought it was reasonable.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I wasn't sticker shocked by it. Once I got my instrument, it dropped down to like $2,400 or something like that.
That's a big savings.
Yeah, so that was nice. And now now that I have more hours, I come up again in September, so we'll see what the new rate is. But if it has any effect on what's going on in the world at the time, and also your age and your hours, so it's always a mix of everything that controls the insurance. But the retractable, now what I did is the other thing I added to the airplane as soon as I got it was I found out that there's a device that you could put into the plane, and my son calls her Bitchin' Betty, that if you've retracted the flaps or you have pulled the throttle back and the landing gear is not down, she starts yelling at you, check landing gear, check landing gear, check landing gear. So and the thing that prompted me to do that was I can't hear the stall warning horn in the airplane. So when I was training with you in your airplanes, I could never hear the stall warning horn. They would tell me, the instructor would say, the stall's horn is on. I go, okay, if you say so. So I said, there's got to be a solution to that. So I found out that they make one that will talk directly into your headset. And it turns out that you could have the additional option on it of telling you about the landing gear if you have a retractable landing gear. Put that in the plane, and
so it goes stall.
Exactly. Exactly. So what a difference that made overall.
Have you told your insurance that you have this? Because I think you also get a deduction if you have kind of like a landing gear safety devices on that.
Oh, I'm gonna have to ask her.
So I think that's something that you should bring up on your next insurance.
But and we have placards everywhere in the airplane for landing gear.
I remember if I remember correctly, you had like your own checklist, and I was like, Mike, why aren't you using my checklist? He's like, well, because you made your checklist for like a 17-year-old. It's small.
right. I blew my checklist up because I'm an old man. It's hard for me, which is the other reason why I won't go to a glass cockpit, because at my age, I can scan my instruments and see the information that I need immediately looking at that one particular gauge. Like if you look at the G5 now with the new autopilot, it puts all of the autopilot information on that little G5. And there's just so much information to try and figure out where it is. When I'm landing, I have actually put tiny little blue pieces of tape on my airspeed so that I can know where I want that needle to be at a glance. I just look over and I see the little blue tape and the needle, and I know I'm right where I want to be. And I've made all these little adjustments for myself in my plane so that it's easy. I took the handle off for my landing gear and painted it a different color, so it's different than every other.
I remember when I saw your airplane and you had like all your labels. You make like the placards even bigger.
Even bigger, right?
But it worked out. It works out.
So we have a routine that the first thing that happens for us when we're coming to a landing is the landing gear goes down. It's the very first thing. So I can drop landing gear at 140. I try to push to get down to 120-ish, but that is the very first thing that happens in the landing sequence before we do anything else. We put gear down, and And my wife, her job is, we're coming to an airport, the landing gear. So she's the first line of defense, and then it's just routine. Like you're saying earlier, you fly the same airplane, you get into your own routine. So there has never been a time that I've gone to flaps before landing gear. It's always landing gear, flaps. Always landing gear, flaps. Well, actually, slow the plane down, which is the other thing that I really had to learn. You're flying up there 15,000 feet and you're hauling ass, and then you're descending and you're still hauling ass, and now all of a sudden you need to get down to 100 knots to be able to land this plane. And that was a learning experience also.
Slowing it down.
Is to slowing the airplane down to the point where, you want to do it while you're still out there for a while. And so just the routines that you come up with, at least for me, for my airplane. Now, I've recently started taking aerobatic lessons. So apparently the Cuban 8 is my move. So if you don't know what the Cuban 8 is, you got to look it up, because it's a really interesting move. And I fly with a guy here at the airport, the Jonathan Fox, and he has an extra 300. And I mean, first time I flew with him, he says to me, listen, this thing's rated for 12 plus or minus. I said, what does that mean? He said, it's 12 G's plus or minus. You will break before the airplane breaks. So you have no concerns about flying this airplane, aggressively. So that I highly recommend to anybody. You must do a spin, get your spin endorsement, because what a difference it makes in understanding that you can control an airplane, that it can do some ridiculous things, and all of a sudden you can still take control of this airplane and not panic.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done 8 continuous spins, looking straight down on the ground, going, what's going to happen here? And you just step on the opposite rudder pedal,
and here it comes again.
All of a sudden, boom, it's just like nothing ever happened.
So we actually started recently, we got the DA-20s now in the fleet, and we can do spin training with the DA-20s, and that's what we use. And everybody that takes that class on the spin, because we talk about it on the ground, then go in the airplane and do the spin training. Everybody that does that comes out a different pilot. Their confidence level, their understanding that, hey, I can recover this airplane and things they don't go right. Because a lot of times people, when you talk about stalls, right? When you first started your training in stalls, everybody was afraid of stalls.
Everybody, right? Absolutely. Definitely afraid of them.
I remember, even for me, right? Like when they first told me, like, oh, stalls, I was like, oh, what is this, the stall? I've been hearing people talking about it on the FBO and at the flight school.
All the magazines. Every magazine comes out, talks about stalls.
Quit stalling, right? You always think of a stall.
But then they add stall spin.
Right.
Again, that's what kills people.
Yeah.
So now you're going, great.
Yeah, I'm adding them all up, right? Check. Now that, so getting the stall over, and once you do a stall, you're like, oh, come on, seriously, this is what I was all, upset about and all nervous about.
Right.
And then you do the spin, and it's like, oh, okay. It's just another procedure. Follow what you've been taught to do, and you can recover. So. Right. I think that really is important. Whether you're going to be an instructor or you're going to be or not, I think you should always get a spin endorsement. Go get some spin training.
So it's one of those things that once you've experienced it, it's a different animal. For example, I said to you earlier, flying under the hood is nothing like flying an IMC. They'd like to think it is, but it is not. There's something about that looking out the window and everything being the same color, everything being white, and there be no difference in what it is. When you're flying under the foggles, you still have stuff that bleeds in, that you can see the contrast of the ground and so it's different.
Not only that, you're psychologically, you know that if everything goes south, I can lift this up and boom, I'm flying back in my normal. There's no taking off the goggles on an IMC, right? There's no clearing the glass and turning on the windshield wiper.
That's right. That's right. So if you're an instrument, working on your instrument, you need to go fly an IMC with a pilot that's done it before. It just completely changes the whole game of doing it. Down here in South Florida, we don't have a lot of IMC. I understand up north, IMC is like our sunshine.
We have IMC, but our IMC is dangerous. It's not like the IMC up north where you'll have, fog or low visibility that you can't see, or, some light rain. Our IMC is thunderstorms and you don't really want to fly.
Well, stuff that you're staying away from, or it's a layer of 5,000 feet that you got to get through
to get on
top or to get down below.
We do have our fogs, but again, that fog is low level fog, so you won't see anything on the runway.
Right.
So I've actually taken off here from Tamiami when I had the Baron, and the visibility was horrible. I mean, you couldn't see. I remember I was flying with Juan. We're taking off. It was nighttime, like it was just about dusk. In the Baron IMC taking off, my alternate was Fort Lauderdale. If I had an issue, I had to divert to Fort Lauderdale because I was completely IMC. And Juan's looking at me like, I'm like, this I do this in the sim all the time. I don't have an Airbus with me,
right?
But with the Baron, I was very comfortable in that airplane. I had a lot of time in it, and we took off past 150 feet, 200 feet. Boom, beautiful,
right.
Calm, day, but. If we had an engine failure on takeoff on that run, I would have been working. It would have not. If I wouldn't recommend somebody that doesn't fly and practice that stuff daily,
absolutely,
to do that kind of flying, because whether it's legal, is it smart? That's the.
As we said earlier, I'm not looking to fly an IMC. I want it to be there in case I have to get out of a situation to do it. But that being said, though, you need to go fly an IMC.
Tracking back is talking about the Baron just reminded me of something that you mentioned. You purchased an airplane that had previous damage history. The Baron I had previous damage history too. And we got a really good deal on that airplane because of that. And we sold it for a very cheap price because of that. I know that there's a lot of talk in the industry about the value loss on an aircraft that has an accident or incident. And it's kind of sad because sometimes that doesn't mean anything. Like in your case, your airplane.
Now, I did the same thing happen to me. I bought this plane for a seriously cheap price. It was ridiculously cheap.
Same thing with the Baron. And if I wouldn't tell you that the Baron had a gear collapse on landing, you would have no idea.
Right.
You would look at the airplane and be like, there's no way, because it was done properly. So it's one of those things that if you know who you're getting it from, you do a good pre-buy inspection, move forward on it, because sometimes like you can get, a really good airplane for that price. We sold that airplane. The person that I still track it every once in a while, it's like your first love, right?
Yeah.
So I still, track it every once in a while, and they fly it at least once a week, which is nice. I like to see that the airplane is flying. It's not sitting in a hangar. But the previous owner that bought the next owner flies the airplane a lot. So talking about airplanes, are you planning on sticking with a 182, or are you looking to something else?
I tried
What's the future of your
multiple
aviation?
times to look at different airplanes. Originally, I still want to get a Piper PA-46, which is the Malibu 6-seater pressurized. I mean, that is the plane that I ultimately would want to get to one day. My flying, though, is different. I don't do a lot of cross-country flying. Our favorite thing to do is we fly at 700 feet out over the water and count turtles. My wife loves flying out over the reef there, and between the porpoises and the turtles and the sharks and the manatees and just the beauty of the water. That's our favorite thing to do. So I was flying with a friend of mine who's retired airline pilot, and I was telling him about the Malibu that I wanted to buy. And he said, "You're not going to do this anymore with that plane." And he said, "You really can't see that down there like you can out of your high wing." And I was like, all right, interesting. So then I started thinking about it. I said, well, because of the stuff that I do mostly around here with a few trips, up to Tallahassee and different places, then I guess I need a toy. I need a sports car. I got the SUV, so now it's time to have a sports car. So I was looking at buying an RV-8, tandem seating, like almost flying a fighter plane in that. And then Elena said to me, well, can you fly the plane? I said, maybe I should get lessons on aerobatics before I start to do that. So that's when I started taking the aerobatics lesson. I learned that, I can pay to rent that plane a lot easier than owning my own a secondary airplane, because I'm not going to give up my 182 ever.
Yeah,
the
that's not a
182
cross country.
The 182 is staying with me forever, whether I pass it down to Matthew or whatever. But she has wormed her way into our heart, and she is just not going to let go. And so we keep the rear seat out of the plane, because most of the time it's Elena and I flying, and have these big rolling bags. You know, when my wife and I travel for a night, you would think we're going for 6 months. I mean,
Mostly your wife.
No, I'm just as bad as she is. You know, I have a costume change for everything I'm going to do. So it just the
That's
space.
right. I remember when we went to pick up that airplane. You guys had a ton of baggage. I'm like, okay, you guys first. Did you change the duffel bags now?
Yes, I have a much bigger duffel bag.
Because I remember you had these hard suitcases.
Oh yeah, they were a pain in the ass.
I'm like, Mike, you
Yeah.
need duffel bags? This is not airplane friendly.
We have these great duffel bags that have wheels on them, and they split in half from top to bottom. So it's phenomenal. So they go right through the baggage door easily, and without the back seat in there, they just lay in there. No muss, no fuss. Everything's fantastic. And you know, with the back seat, you can still get them in there. But what a pain in the butt! Nobody's sitting in the back seat.
Right.
So we get rid of the back seat. Put
Well, you
everything
save some
in.
weight too.
You know, in this plane, weight is not an issue. It is crazy how much of a workhorse this plane is. You know, we go pick up Matthew at the end of the year, and he's got, between his guns and the ammo and his bags and everything, the plane is just loaded to the ceiling, it seems like. And it's like there are two people in the plane. She is just, matter of fact, she likes to fly heavy in the rear. Actually keep a toolbox pushed all the way to the back, because she lands better with weight.
It's a lot of weight. There's a big engine in that nose.
Yeah,
right? So
that nose
engine
that was the one thing that was super different in this airplane, to getting used to.
A lot of trim, right? Nose up trim.
Oh my God! And I got to tell you, I'm not the greatest. The landings I struggle. I still struggle today with landings. It is not my greatest moment. Now, that being said, a good landing for me is I don't know when I touch the ground. Elena thinks I'm a little too hard on myself, but that to me is a good landing. Anything other than that was not a good landing. So I worked really, really hard, because the landing gear on this plane is very expensive and would not call it the most robust out there in the industry. So I really tried to put her down smoothly, which has been a big learning curve for me to be able to do that. And I have finally come up with a whole bunch of little things that, with my placards in place, you know, I finally understand having a set of numbers that works. Okay, 1600 on the manifold, one a flap, gear down gives me a drop of 500 feet per minute and 90 miles per hour, and that is almost every time that happens. I go to two flaps, I got to bump it up to 1900, and she is just perfect every time. And I land with 2.5 flaps now is how I land that plane. Every single time, pull it back, and figuring out. And now I've learned that if I get to 200 feet per minute drop, puts me softly on the runway. So once I get to two flaps, my next thing is 200 feet per minute, and just let it come down. And that was the hardest thing for me to learn, is to let it settle. I pull so often and give myself that little bump up.
And then that bump up, and then boom.
Oh my God! Well, I've become the master of adding fuel right before you land to arrest that fall. But now that I've learned the 200, you know, because when you do the math, that's about 6 feet per second that you're dropping, which is not a very, very big drop. So now I get myself down to that, and it's just, and I only land on paved runways. So and most of the places I land, the runways are so long that
if you land 1,000 feet, it doesn't.
I don't rush myself anymore. This whole thing of having to land on the numbers, not unless I have to. If I'm landing, I mean, the shortest runway I've landed on is 2,300 over at Everglades, And that was very early in my career, and just went to go do it to see if I could do it. And you got to know what you can do and what you can't do.
Right.
And then you start to, I find you adapt to what's going on.
Did you get some crab out there?
No, I didn't, because I have my own trap. So, but that's the other thing that Elena does for me when we're flying, is she reminds me, take your time. No need to rush. If everything doesn't look right, I've learned to take a 3-mile final now. Forget it. I don't need to turn this thing in at a mile and a half. Get myself out there 3 miles, take my time, get everything set, get everything stabilized, put it on the ground, easier. Every time I've had my worst landings have been when I've rushed it. So
you rush it, or the controller rush it, it just leads always to.
And which is the thing that I learned with that first IMC landing, instrument landing, was no longer am I going to go to a final approach fix. I'm going to tell them I want this fix out there, and that's where I'm flying to. And they'll accommodate me. I don't see where they're going to go, oh, no, you can't do that. No, they'll accommodate me and let me do that. Give me much more time to be set up, have everything dialed in, and just be able to fly that straight in without having to making that turn, I think, is the hardest thing. Judging when to turn it so that you don't fly through it and then play the game going back and forth. And I've spent a lot of hours. I fly every landing now as an approach. Every single one.
That's the secret to success. You're talking, I consider myself a senior pilot, I guess, if you can say that. Every time I fly, in a 172, in an Airbus, whatever airplane that I'm flying in, I always load an approach, no matter what airplane. And you tell me that I can't fly a visual approach? Of course I can fly a visual approach. Sometimes I don't even follow the approach, right? But I always load an approach.
Well, not only do I load the approach, but I fly the needles.
Yeah, no, I fly the needles, and I come it down, and I do my math, and I check myself. Okay, I'm on my 1 mile, I should be 300 feet. 2 miles, I should be at 600. 3 miles should be around 900 feet. And I kind of do that math in my head as I'm coming down, and I always fly an approach. Why? Because the day that I really need to fly an approach,
I want it to be like breathing. Exactly. I don't even have to think about it. That my hands automatically let that needle be there.
And how much more does it cost?
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
I mean, you can train yourself to not look out the window. You can train yourself to just look at the needles. And Elena's looking out the window, and I'm landing most of the time at towered airports, so I'm the only guy landing, and that. So it's you have a lot of safety built into it, and still take the practice of doing it. Even if you just fly down to 500 feet, it just gives you the wind correction and everything else that's going on to just get second nature used to it. Not just doing it the 6 times every 6 months that you have to do, but if you do it every single time. And that's the cool thing about that 375.
50 feet.
You can decide how many miles out. Then it gives you that you're within range, and you can press visual, and it gives you the glide slope and glide path.
For any runway.
Without loading anything in. So you can fly those needles without question every single time.
I love that feature. I always teach our students that feature, and I hope my instructors are always enforcing it, because it's such a good tool to have.
It's such a good tool to have.
Are we going to get a commercial rating?
No. More for liability reasons than anything else. I don't ever want to have to be in a position where I'm being paid for
just for fun. I'm not saying as a.
That's part of the reason I'm doing the aerobatics, is because it's just for fun to make me a better pilot.
Again, of course, I knew you're going to say no to that. I mean, you're not going to necessarily do something like commercial flying, but just getting the certificate and learning new skills, kind of pushing that bar.
I'll go do the training without getting a certificate, because I don't ever want it to be said that you were commercially rated and that. It's just a liability thing for me. It's for no other reason.
Plus, you got to study another 800 questions on the.
Yeah, well.
Mike, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you coming in and being a guest on our show. I think you're sharing your story will motivate some more people to come into aviation.
I hope some more old men want to learn how to fly.
So you guys can have some, close for lunch somewhere and fly your airplane somewhere.
You're never too old to do this.
I'm glad that you share that. I'm glad that you share your story, because again, my goal with this the flight school and this podcast is getting people talking about aviation, excited about flying, and getting a license or coming back into flying and pushing aviation forward, or general aviation was really my passion.
Right.
So thanks again for coming.
Enjoyed being here. Thanks, Felipe.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. For more of our content, search on YouTube for Aviator Zone. If you know someone we should have on the show, please reach out at podcast@aviator.zone.